Welcome to Mac and Bleu, the cutting-edge podcast for the nation's builders, merging the realms of construction with exciting advancements in technology. Join us on a thrilling journey where we delve into the dynamic world of blockchain, AI, the metaverse, virtual and augmented reality, and their transformative impact on the industry. Our engaging discussions span a wide spectrum, covering not only construction, economic development, supply chain, and market segments, but also exploring the vibrant tapestry of diversity within the construction landscape. We shed light on the intersection of local politics and its profound influence on the construction sector, while championing the remarkable contributions of women and minorities in construction. For all things Mac and Bleu, head to www.macandbleu.com, and don't forget to subscribe on YouTube. I'm your host, JJ Levinsky. Now let's get into it. Hi everyone, welcome to another episode of Mac and Bleu. I'm your host, JJ Levinsky, CEO and co-founder of Bleu. Today I'm lucky enough to have Shannon Breen, who's the CEO and founder of Freight Vana. Welcome, Shannon. A little background, I was fortunate enough to get to know and meet Shannon just in this past year through the State 48 Foundation, and it's, I would say, our circle of mutual friends and everything. It's kind of like, oh my God, I can't believe we didn't meet before. But then even furthermore, when Shannon and I were in the foundation, we were on the same episode or the same series. I think it was the fourth of the Entrepreneurial speaker series. Shannon and I got to sit up on the stage and get tomatoes thrown at us collectively. But he won't like the blow the smoke up his ass thing. But one thing I will tell everyone, and hopefully you'll hear it today in the podcast, is Shannon has a calming presence and a confidence that I think exemplifies what entrepreneurship can be and should be when done properly. So today, hopefully we'll go through a little bit the story about Shannon, Freight Vana, and then we'll geek out a little bit as far as where logistics and construction and everything that's going on in the growth of the valley collides in good, bad, indifferent space. So with that, Shannon, welcome.
Thanks for having me. Yeah, we shared that stage. It was a fun night. Local entrepreneurs, true passion, I think, of both of ours, and really cool opportunity to me as I kind of transition out of corporate life over the last few years and figure out like where and how do you give back. And I felt like that stage was great. A couple hundred people in the audience, and just you share your war stories. And
you're on the board too.
I am.
Yeah.
Yeah. It's been really great working with Mike, who you've had recently on the show, and that team and just what they're about. And honestly, just early stages for them too, as far as when they started in 2020,
right?
And figuring out where they're growing and partnerships and corporate sponsorships and all the changes there. So it's really cool to be a part of.
So first and foremost, you're kind of a local guy. I mean, we were born here, but you grew up here, didn't you?
Born in Oregon, but moved here in 90. So this is home. East Valley guy, Chandler Gilbert border, Chandler High, ASU. So have never left the state. Couple opportunities to do so, but just absolutely love it in Phoenix.
Did Mike make you get the Arizona tats yet?
I have no tats. So when I hang out with Mike, I feel way underserved. You know, he's got every sports team.
Well, Mike, you can take the tats for Shannon and I that we don't have.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, we'll live vicariously through him.
He's got a little skin left somewhere.
Yeah,
I don't know.
Yeah.
We'll just shave his head and start doing
I didn't know if he has the Rattlers. You know, I was going to ask him one day.
You know what?
He's all in on the AZ Sports. But I'm like, which ones doesn't he have?
Well, now it's funny with we'll have to get him propped up for this one since the XFL and the USFL combined for the UFL. There's probably going to be an Arizona team that he'll have to get that one now.
I'll have to step up.
So we wouldn't do our interaction justice if we didn't go back to kind of. I know I'm not asking to give you a resume, but kind of give that building block of post ASU, once the hangover was over, how the hell did you get into corporate America? And then eventually, let's dive into the Freight Vana story, which is cool as hell.
Yeah, to just, I won't go back to when I was a young boy, but the younger version of myself always thought I'd be in franchising. Right, I would own I had an uncle that was heavily involved in pretzels and in malls, and I literally almost moved to Texas when I graduated ASU in 22 in Plano to open a pretzels franchise, and I always just pictured having multiple ones of those. So I always had an entrepreneurial spirit. I give my uncle a lot of credit. I mean, he kind of laid that foundation. I learned from him some of the things I wanted to do, and just the side piece, I always gave my uncle a lot of credit. I always tell the story because he sat me down, super ambitious, teenager, and just was like, hey, unless you have your health and your happiness, none of it matters. And he told me that young, and it didn't really hit at the age of 17 or 18. But I can tell you, as I fast forward multiple decades.
Take it from an old guy.
From that, right? Those words still resonate with me more than ever today, where I'm like, and your uncle told you that when you were like 17, 18. So, so aspirations to do that, didn't take that plunge, did some stuff in the real estate markets, commercial, residential, had a window covering company with a good buddy for 4 or 5 years. Then 2008 happened.
When all shit hit the fan.
Yeah, and construction, right? And so the commercial contracts, had some, contracts with some REITs. Those fell apart and really had to kind of figure out what I was going to do next. So my background's in finance. I ended up working for a subsidiary of a private equity company out here locally. And then in 2012, a good buddy called and said, hey, like and we started chatting and know him since high school. And it's like, hey, it really could be some opportunities for you here in transportation and trucking. And I was like, I don't know anything about that. I don't have a supply chain degree. He's like, that's not the skill set necessarily needed in what we do. And so in the summer of 2012, I transitioned over to one of the larger trucking companies in the country and worked there for the better part of a decade until I resigned 3 years ago, about 6 days ago. So, 3 years ago, I resigned to create Freight Vana and kind of create my own transportation dream and story with a really good group of people.
So take us back to, so your decade with Swift and Knight. I mean, everyone knows the names, so it's we can say them on the air. It's no big deal.
Kind of a big local company.
Yeah, kind of a big local company. Huge. Coming out of there, what was, I think the audience would love to know, okay, Shannon, what was that vision? What was that incubation like in your brain of when you wanted, leaving for the reasons of what you wanted to do versus, looking in the rearview mirror? Yeah,
I think it was an interesting segment for me, right? Because I grew up with entrepreneurial ambitions. Then you end up in big time corporate America. And not to like typecast or whatever, but a lot of the stereotypes and stuff are true.
Yeah, there's a reason. There's juxtapositions all throughout that.
There's a reason. And so like after 10 years, you kind of ask yourself, like, is this the rack I want to run? Like the quarterly stuff, the board meetings, not that I had to do the board meetings per se, but like it always puts pressure in a different way. The strategies come to about in a different way, talent acquisition. And so then I found myself really thinking like, is this what I want to do for the rest of my career? Because at some point, right, you get to a point where you're like at an inflection point. The other part, personally, I'd say what you talk about the mental framework is, and I've shared this story a lot with entrepreneurs, and people ask me kind of like how you get to this point. But health and wellness, go back to the health and wellness. Well, in years back, prior to making that decision, my father got sick, like a lot of people deal with the C word, right?
Yep.
And I remember driving from my corporate job and watching him go through that, and it really just hit in a way that for me, I had these ambitions, was kind of falling out of love, I guess would be the best way to explain it with corporate life. And then I watched my father go through that, and it was just this really intensified idea of like, hey, it doesn't matter. Like, just go do your dream, do what you want to do it for the right reasons, because life's too short, right? I watched my father and mother, educators here locally, had taught school for 35 years, and you watch them kind of sacrifice everything for that, stable retirement, which is great on the financial side. But if you don't have, going back to that health and wellness, if you don't have that, it doesn't matter that you've got a pension and all this stuff that my parents were able to accumulate. So for me, it was just like, hey, I've got to live my best effort for now. And then I think lastly, I would share on that, like my dad was always a low key, like side entrepreneur. Right. Oh. So he'd teach school, but then on summers he'd want to go start a company or a weight business where him and his buddy would rehab like weights and equipment, or he had all these ideas. And so it was like, but he always took the route that was like that really stable one for my sister and I and the family. And so I felt like this was my opportunity to maybe put all chips in and take the big bet on myself and a really good team and an industry I love, but also kind of a way to kind of like honor my dad and his entrepreneurial spirit, and make the big bet when, quite honestly, I have everything I have because him and my mom and all the sacrifices they made along the way. So
it sounds like from what your parents had instilled in you and your uncle, he's pretty good at, what would I say, like some good catalyst to entrepreneurship.
Yeah. Well, Besides the sickness, yes.
Yeah, besides the sickness.
Yeah. But that was a catalyst, right?
Yeah.
No doubt. Like watching that really hit me in a certain way. And I know everybody personally has family or friends that handles like tragedy. My dad's still battling today, but it changes, right? And I was like, man, now's the time to do it. If you're going to do it now.
Do you find, because you opened this, I'm going to kind of go down this rabbit hole a little bit, that the tearing of you, if you will, of, you talked about your father, and do you find yourself, because the last time I checked, you still have the same DNA as him,
Mm-hmm.
do you have that same struggle with stability versus that renegade entrepreneurial spirit? And renegade's maybe an overstatement, but anybody that I know who owns businesses, whether you call yourself an entrepreneur or not, it's like that divide between when is aggressive too aggressive and when is stable too stable. Like when is
crazy good?
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
So do you have any of that? Is that struggle internally?
Not really. And I think the reason why is because I have such a stable base behind me, right? And I'd done so well, and to create that opportunity. And then honestly, mentors would be like, hey, at some point you get too far down the tracks, you're not going to want to reset and take the bet. So if you're going to do this, like do it when you have a ton of the energy and all the ambition still, but like you get too far down the tracks, you may not want to make that leap. So I really sought out business leaders, mentors that I'd worked with that I highly respected, and them were like, why wait? And that goes back to timing, right? Because everyone's always like, oh, that's not a good time. That's not a good time. That's not a good time. And I look back at now, like I could give you 20 reasons why it's still not a good time. Yeah. But like that's not how the story works. No. And I think taking that first leap is the big one for the reasons why you do it. And you know what the coolest part is? And I shared this on stage, and I think for your audience here, the coolest part is like you always perceive that it's this abyss, that if this doesn't work out, I'm done. But and this is kind of like your classically condition, like it's all or nothing. And I say all chips in, but here's the reality: when I quit, I received phone calls from some amazing people like that I, have the dearest relationships with in my industry.
Right.
And they were like, no, you got to come work for me. No, you got to come work with us here. Like, tell me if it doesn't work out, like I'm your first call. And then you quickly have this realization, right? 2 weeks after I resigned, I'm sitting there thinking, it's not an abyss. It's just a different opportunity in a different way and a different deal. So I was like, it emboldened me even more to go kind of down the path, because I always knew like the backdrop was, man, I just can call a few people that like know how I am, know how I work. And if that's the path, then that's one I can take too. But at least this one I get to like truly live out my dreams and see how it
gives
all
you
works.
that. And I don't know if the words are right, but the confidence and the validation that to what you're saying is like, hey, fail forward. If I get knocked down, I'll just do it again, right?
Yeah, because a lot of people put the excuses like, hey, I can't do this because there's risk. Well, there's always the risk, right? I can't do this because my kids are young. I can't do this because my kids are this. I can't do it because my kids are like, so if you have kids, you can, you're going to have to take a risk, especially in entrepreneurship, as you well know. Like it is chips in, and unless you're going to have the no kid, argument, or the, hey, they're in college or they're married and they're like, well, like then there's this huge gap of your life.
Give up
like,
20 years.
Never do
20 years.
So I wasn't willing to like do that when I resigned. My kids were 3 and 7, and I've got some stepkids also. So a lot of responsibilities there.
All right, let's start with what the hell is Freight Vana, because logistics, you use that word. Mm-hmm. Let the audience know, layman's terms, what goes on behind the scenes? What do you really do? What does Freight Vana do?
Yeah, so we don't own trucks. So number one, we're a third-party logistics company. So we're coordinating transportation moves between the myriad of trucking companies that exist in the U.S. And the largest and smallest medium-sized shippers in the country. So a lot of those shippers rely on companies like us to contract with the carriers, pay the carriers, track, do all the pieces, and kind of manage that long tail of carriers that exist in the market. Fun fact most people don't realize about trucking, 85% of trucking in the U.S. is made up of trucking companies that are less than 100 trucks. So you mentioned my prior employer, right, being huge, and like, and there's all these big companies that exist. That only represents 15% of all the trucks. Like massive size trucking companies, only 15 to 20%. So that means 80%, like true Americana of trucking, is made up of mom owner operators, single truck, single trailer fleets, all the way up to 100. But that is the majority. And so there's a huge long tail, hundreds of thousands of companies that make up the U.S. trucking market. And so my business and what my team do is we coordinate with those shippers, work with the appropriate carriers, and we're essentially a matchmaker. It's almost like a trading floor every day, working on price and buying and selling and tracking. So heavy operational, heavy people. Tech's always in play, but a lot of people to pull it off.
Thanks for establishing that baseline, Shannon. Then on the tech side, have you found that you've had to develop or institute proprietary like software for your own change in development?
Exactly. Yeah.
And has that been actually like some of your value add or your value proposition in the marketplace?
Yeah, and it will be even more. So there's a buy build, like they call them TMSs, transportation management system. So we have one that's out of the box, but there's all componentry that you need, that you would want custom. And so what's unique about us is we run an entire asset-based trailer fleet. So I said we don't own and operate the trucks, but we have essentially a gray pool fleet where we can take our trailers and our tech packages and put them into shippers, and then the carriers show up and they run our trailers, and we work with the largest retailers in the country. So very unique from a build perspective. But to your point, technology needs to be unique because not everybody has built their operating system in that way. So my team's constantly working and iterating on the platform that really is managing a pretty large and growing piece of our assets, which is those trailers.
Right.
So yeah, you're always being challenged like on the creative side of what to build and how to service your customers.
So the first thing that comes to mind is, as let's say, if you're dealing with all this side with that 85% of mom and pop, may be an overstatement, but smaller companies, maybe less sophistication with their own IT, tech, whatever. And then over here, I'm suspecting that the marketplace, i.e. all the stuff that it's going to, typically
Walmart's, Target's, Costco's.
Typically this is going to be a little bit more sophisticated. So you're, as this middle woman in between less sophistication and more sophistication, as that divide grows, how are you unifying it? And like, I'll give you an example. I can think of some friends of mine that grew up that maybe they have a husband-wife trucking company, and that's their livelihood. And they miss one delivery on that Thursday, the rest of their week is screwed, and their whole revenue stream is screwed for that week. How is that? Like, how does your industry and what you guys do mitigate those kinds of situations? Or isn't that your job?
That is the job to do it. I think how you do it, I think the interesting part about transportation is it can be strategic, and just like every industry, incredibly transactional, right? And so there's a reason why, like for us, when we hung our banner and we talk about like what are our core tenets as a company, it's transparency, technology, and trust. Technology because we think is the connector, which is why it's that middle piece. Transparency on the front end because a lot of industries, as you know, it's very transactional, lacks transparency. Without the technology, without the transparency, it builds distrust. So one of the areas that we're really focused on is that transparency technology to deliver trust, and we're doing that on both sides, both to the shippers and the carriers, because the industry, just by nature, when you say the word broker, right, has a negative connotation to it. It's a lack of trust, and if every industry has brokers, but it's like, oh, I don't know if I like the way that looks. I'm like, are they trying to screw me over? How does that work? And in our industry is no different with transportation. So that small mom and pop that you talk about that missed that delivery, or maybe that broker pulled that load from them, right? Because maybe they found a cheaper option. Would that ever happen? Well, sure, it could happen, right? But we've been very intentional in our build to avoid those scenarios in our incentive programs, in our system structures. So from a gamesmanship perspective, we technically are a broker, but we don't interact like a traditional one, which is another really unique part of our build in addition to the trailers.
Okay. Thanks for that explanation. Another curious thing would be specific to what you guys do or the kind of the business you're in. Is there more consolidation going on? In other words, are there a lot of you, and are you out acquiring other yous, or are others trying to acquire you?
Yeah, great question. So you have hundreds of thousands of carriers, obviously shippers. You have thousands, hundreds of thousands of shippers. Right. Technically, from a brokers in the U.S., there's 30,000 licensed people that do what I do. 30,000. Okay. Now, I would tell you that long tail, the 80-20, or however you want to do it, that starts to spread pretty quickly. The top 100 in our industry, you'd need to be at a revenue stream of between like 100 and 120 million. And, that's what it takes to get into the top 100 of 30,000. I'm lucky enough to say and excited to say that like we're on that verge of breaking into the top 100.
Congratulations.
After 2.5 pretty challenging years. So really bullish and excited about the future, but that kind of gives you an idea of.
Right.
But I also came from a place that used to be multi-billion dollars and like so my team did as well.
You have the mindset for it. Right.
Exactly. And that is the huge piece that I love that you called that. The people say like, well, how? And it's like, because you don't expect it in like an arrogant way.
No.
Right. You've been there before.
Yeah.
And I equate it to like professional athletes, whether it's football or golf, they get hurt. And you would think everybody knows how razor thin it is to get into professional sports, razor thin. So then how when you like hurt your back or your wrist as a golfer or your knee as a running back, how are you back? Now, ultimately, you already have these crazy talents and abilities, but if it's razor thin, like, isn't there 20 people behind you? But it's like, I think 50% of that for golfers and sports, it's just that 6 inches between your ears because you've been there before. You've played on that field. You know what the training consists of. You know what I mean? And you're applying yourself. So your expectation is to be on that course, is to be on that field. And I feel like business is the exact same.
True.
And I have a plethora of sports analogies if you want me to tie it together. But like that expectation, but not in an arrogant way of like, I've played at this level. We can get back there. I think that's really powerful in business.
There comes a time when dreams become a reality, when you see your vision materialize into a true work of art. And the only way to get there is to choose a general contractor who shares that same vision and knows how to bring it to life. At Bleu, we aren't so big that we've forgotten where we've come from. And we aren't so small that we can't care for your projects regardless of their size. When your vision deserves safety, perfection, timeliness, and expertise in order to become a reality, trust Bleu to get it done right the first time.
So let's couple that with where my question was a little bit ago, because again, I look at the audience going, Shannon, how do I get my companies through there? So if you can be honest, have you done it all just organically, or has your growth come through acquisitions?
Zero acquisition.
Strictly just organic
Pure
growth.
Organic growth. So interesting story. So I also had like my first day was unlike many entrepreneurs' first days. I had 24 very skilled logisticians joined me on the journey, right? All that I knew and trusted. And so that created this really interesting kind of nucleus, if you will, from an origin story. Whereas most founders, right, you got the one that goes to 2, then 3, and then, hey, we had a really good quarter. We're going to go to 6. But like we started with 24, have over 85 now. But no acquisitions. I wouldn't say that's like out of the realm in our future, but, also very timely and takes a ton of manpower from my experience in corporate America. I worked on the Knight Swift merger, one of the largest in the industry, like as far as operationally and merging teams and systems, and like that is a massive drain, as you only know, when you acquire companies. Like, there's a financial piece. It's like, oh, it makes sense on paper, but then there's an execution and a personality and a cultural segmentation where you're bringing that together. That takes so much work. Yeah. And I've lived that once at like a huge scale, so haven't signed up for that yet in the Freight Vana journey, but open to it probably some point.
So you brought up, we always talk about this, but I think it would be befitting to have you share it too. Back to the cultural piece. Anybody that I know that knows you and talks about your company, they love the culture that you guys have created. I can think of even when we were at one of the events that you and I were together, when I got to meet the bigger part of your team, again, without patronizing you, I could see that everyone on your team, they were proud of Freight Vana. I mean, you guys were, you had your swag on, but there was this attitudinal type, just this aura of, I'm proud to be here. I'm proud to be part of this team. That was pretty cool to see. How did you build and retain that, Shannon?
Build, number one, obviously the good people on the core that I knew and trusted, and I really put a lot into those folks. As far as continuing that path, we were very creative in the marketing, and I think there's not only the creative on the marketing side, But I always share this, folks, for recruiting sakes. You go meet with a recruiter, like, this is going to be your greatest job. This is where you're going to grow and develop. This is where there's immense opportunities. Everybody says those words. This is a really great place to work. What's the reality?
Yeah.
Does the reality match the recruiter? Like, recruiters have jobs, but then, like, so I think, like, talking to people that work at the organization has been a superpower. Being willing for people to, like, come spend a day on the floor and see what their, the job environment would look like. Talking to people that have 3, 6, 12, 2 years of experience, be like, hey, how's your journey been? Like, you've got to kind of be authentic and raw in it, outside of just a recruiting loop that then ends to a job. Because what you find is a lot of people are like, yeah, and then I was there for a month, and they feel disenfranchised, or even kind of like lied to, maybe, like, well, it's not really like that, right? And so, and there's ups and downs in that, right? Like, I think culture is like seasons too. Like, you're going to have tough seasons where you're getting your butt kicked, and, maybe a significant person on your team leaves, or you got to make some hard decisions. And that's part of, like,
it's part of the journey.
Part of business and sport, and that doesn't mean you have a bad culture. I think how you bounce back from it, just like how a team bounce back, and what you're building still is like that core piece. So I think us just being raw and, like, really authentic, and then being fun and willing to be, like, outside the box too. I think that's the one thing I've loved just as much as anything is when you work in large corporate America, there is boxes and there are rules, and
boxes within the boxes,
within the boxes, and 10 sign-offs for one decision. And, you hate to say that, but that's how it works, because there's so much, so many layers there. And when you start new and you start fresh, like, you can challenge the status quo, you can be fun, you can be a little zany, you can be quirky. There's nothing behind that. Like, it's just you, like, putting your heart on. I think people identify and embody that. So I always tell young entrepreneurs or people that are trying to grow their businesses, like, the more, you can use social as a platform, which is a huge tool, right, for acquiring talent. Because what they'll see in social, and especially the generations that are consuming that social, is what you are. And if they vibe with that, then they're interested in your company, and they're already following, or you post a role, they see that role, they share it with a friend. And so that momentum, like sport, begets momentum.
And I think I'm sure you'll agree with this. On the social side, a lot of people see the why, because let's be honest, people want to know the why now. And you can talk about it, or you can exhibit it through, like you said, with social, which I've seen your social, and it embodies that to the T, where I can go, oh, I know it. I can feel what Freight Vana is about just by watching the social.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
You have a heavy operations background when you were, that decade plus of that. We kind of, I would say, we focus a little bit on the entrepreneurial side and the culture side, but I think a lot of people also want to know, like, especially from someone like with your background, hey, Shannon, that's great. How much of that operational discipline what am I trying to look for here? How much of that do you still use, or how much of that at corporate have you thrown away?
Still use a lot of the operational discipline, right? Because it all comes down to safety, and which then, like, obviously bleeds, like my finance background, then bleeds into cost, efficiencies. If you're not in efficient costs, even on the service side, right? You work so hard to attain and get new customers. And so, like, there's that customer acquisition. But if you're not executing operationally, like, and I always share the analogy with the, the holes in the bucket. Like, we can keep piling the stuff in the front, but if we're not retaining it, we are missing. Like, I would much rather, from an entrepreneurial perspective, like, I'd rather make sure that the bottom of that bucket is secure. Yes, keep putting in the top of the funnel, but some companies are wild. They'll just continue to pump it in the funnel, and on the backside, they're just draining out. Yeah. And it's like, so I am wildly interested and passionate with my team on that bottom and the top. Yeah. I know a lot of people say they are, but, like, it just sometimes gets only driven by top line, and you're not focusing on the retention and the growth of those retained customers. And you've done business a long time, like, those ones that grow you the most, the ones that have been around and the ones that stay with you, it's those long relationships that you fostered through all that work for multiple years and seasons and industry inflections. Like, those are the ones that are going to bet on you even more as you continue to grow.
Specific to that then, Shannon, what have you found? I'm trying to pick nuggets here for the audience. Is what in that, either reporting or KPIs or analytics or data, what things have you seen that have transcended the generational, like we were talking about social as one, but what data has been transcended all those kind of things? So it doesn't matter if it's millennial, Gen X, Gen Y, whatever. What have you seen with that operational discipline that still works to help do what you said, that mix of top line, bottom line?
Yeah, I think the interesting one, and start at the top line, right? Okay. Most companies don't even share their top line or bottom line with their teams.
What?
I mean, their whole teams, like depending on how big your team is, because there's a risk in that too, right?
There is.
Especially if you're struggling or if you're doing really well. And so a lot of people pull that back. So like, oh, I only share that with directors, or I only share this, right? And so we try to figure out what that line is, because that transparency can, while it's wildly beneficial, it can scare people too.
Right.
Because your point on that risk thing, like if we aren't profitable in a month, do I have people like, oh, I should freshen up my resume? Right, even though it's planned or something, right? And so I think transparency on the top and bottom lines with your team leaders is important, so they know where you stand. Shouldn't be any shock and awe in that, but sometimes if CEOs are doing really, really well, that's not something that they want to share so much.
But is it only financials, or are you actually tracking a lot of other things?
Oh, we have so much.
Yeah.
I mean, so
but I guess that's where I'm going, Shannon. Is how have you? Because I'm thinking everyone listens to this, they're going, yeah, but Shannon, when's too much and when's too little? And they want to hear like other entrepreneurial success stories like yours of can you think of any examples where it was too much, too little, just right, or where you adjusted based on, over your pretty cool short-term success here?
Yeah, I think going back, past career, current career, always checking metrics and like individual production metrics and call statistics and all this stuff. I think you've got to know like your team and your manager and your industry too, though, right? Because sometimes that stuff can be skewed, right? So I would share a story where like it's wildly interesting to be like, margin per person or phone calls or this or that, but then also realize I've got people covering probably the entire U.S., right? So is it fair to, if I have someone that's covering, let's call it Idaho or Montana, and from a trucking perspective, not Southern California, but if I'm stacking those two against each other, is that fair and reasonable? So the metrics would be like, whoa, well, JJ up in Idaho is terrible compared to Shannon in Los Angeles, right? You've got to still, even though there's metrics, like there's a story to be told, and you got to have an innate understanding of how those metrics come to life. And so that'd be one where like the metrics can then lie or fool you into believing that like, JJ, you might be 10 times better than me. I just may be working in Los Angeles and you may be in a remote area where our business doesn't have a lot of moves. So I think a lot of people do that with either sales reps and different stuff. And like they want to have these like standard metrics, but where they can lose people is not having like anything else, a little bit of a gray area to be able to massage that and have an understanding of how that works. And you rack and stack folks all against each other, sometimes you can lose an entire crowd. Yeah. And it might not be intended because you're really trying to get everybody to this level, but is that the right metric to follow?
Another one with where you're going, into the hundreds of millions of top line, a lot of questions would come. I think, Shannon, is like, okay, what is your leadership? Or how do you create an org chart that matches what you guys want to do? So like, do you have a board of directors? How many people do you have at the executive level? And then the direct reports. Just people are always wondering like, okay, Shannon, when you get bigger, like how many layers do you have to add to the onion? And what's been the answer for you? Yeah,
I mean, we started unique, right? So I started like opposite of most companies because a lot of people I hired were directors, VPs, already. Right. Like we brought in this down and we knew we'd grow into it and then be able to kind of grow our kind of org chart out underneath that as the business grew. That made it very unique because a lot of people are like, oh, cool.
You had a bit of an advantage, yeah.
Huge advantage there. But I just say like, even for scale, so no board at this point. I mean, we're still solely on a Series A that we raised through friends and family and a company. So like we'll be looking to adapt that. And change that as, or I should have said C round. We're going to look at doing a Series A this year. We've got some exciting folks. So that'll be an interesting first time experience for me. Never done it. But from an org chart perspective, to get back to what you were talking about, I mean, 4 folks in our like executive leadership team, me, my co-founder, my CTO, and our SVP. That's kind of round that out. And that's kind of where we get together to, kick around the company problems and this and that. 3 or 4 VPs, directors probably looks like 10 directors to various areas because we have everything from tech to product, back office, all the different pieces to run an operation with that revenue size. And then outside of that, you have team leads and different stuff as it breaks down. So
I know you mentioned it. You just gave us a little glimpse under the hood with Series A. What, there's a lot of people out there that, hey, I'm going to eventually have to get to that point too, or at least that's my aspiration. Do you have any advice for others out there in raising capital?
Raising capital, yes. Series A, no, because I haven't done it. So
Okay.
I may fail miserably. And you have me back, I'll tell you all the war stories. But
we might have you back.
Yeah, I'd say this. Like on raising money, I believe it's all about, for entrepreneurs, they're betting on the people. And I've said this multiple times. I've raised a significant amount of money. Yes, it's your experience, but at the end of the day, it'll be your network. It'll be how you treated people, and they're going to be making bets on you personally.
Yep.
And there's the level of comfort you either have to have or not, right? Because that comes with a incredible amount of responsibility and a weight that a lot of people, unfortunately, they just see dollars. If I just had the money. It's like, yeah, but you realize like all of this is also predicated on relationships and delivering. And at the end of the day, don't get it twisted. They're investors. They want to see you succeed. They're also looking for a return.
They want success.
They want a return.
Yeah.
But they're going to be making bets on you. And so I've always told this, like the way that you treat people and the way you network. Like when I talk to young folks that are aspirational entrepreneurs, I'm like, hey, what's your network look like? Or they're working at a job and like they don't know other people in their industry and you really have to work hard. Like I've lived in Phoenix for 30 years, so I have a pretty solid network of professionals and people that know folks, different industries to tap into. But for someone that's maybe younger in their career, what's their network consist of? Who knows? And like, hey, are you taking lunches? Are you asking someone that's successful to sit down at lunch? And like, because you never know when you might be able to like call in on that relationship. And the other thing is build those relationships when you don't have an ask.
There you go.
Because everybody wants to have a solid relationship when they have an ask. But most people, if you go back in their history and say who helped them in this, they were working with them, doing something else, showed up this way for them, had a history with them. They knew a friend, they vouched for them, and then they have an opportunity, right? So it's really what you've done. It's the accumulation. But for young folks, because they haven't done a ton yet, right? Outside, let's say high school and college, and let's say you're in your 20s, like you really got to work hard and be intentional about building a network. And there's great ways to do it. We're a part of one that you mentioned early in your show. Like that's the type of network building you have to do, even though maybe some, two older guys are sitting on stage and you don't get anything from them. Who else is in that room?
He's talking about me, not himself.
I was putting us in the same bucket.
It's funny. I'm glad you brought up that topic because I'm going to ask you kind of a question rhetorically through me. I get the question now is, JJ, now that you're, in your 50s, how do you keep up the networking and what do you still do? It's a tough one for me to answer because I think it's not, I wouldn't say it's a maturation because it's not that, but I look at different things. So for instance, I know you and I have talked and we've talked on the episode, it's, okay, maybe there's a point in your life where you need to be in EO or YPO or Vistage or those kind of things. And then there's another one where, hey, you're over in philanthropic groups, which I know you and I, we do that as well. And then over here, you still need a social network. And over here, you might have an industry specific, like you might be in a national logistics type thing, or in my case, I might be in construction specific forums or things like that. And then you do things like this, we podcast. And so it never ends. Mm-mm. But my answer to it, Shannon, and for the listener is just never stop looking. Just keep picking up a rock and go, oh, there's another opportunity. And pick up the next one and pick up the next one. And it all connects. Like I'm just amazed at how, I always give it the 6 degrees of separation turns into more like half of a half of a half of 1 degree when it comes down to it. And each year gets more connected.
And more refined.
Yeah.
And like I had the, best lunch of the year yesterday.
Because it was free?
It was free, and we're only 8 days into the year.
Woo!
So,
whoever bought him lunch, thank you.
Low bar, right? But best lunch. Like this guy's in town from the Southeast, and I'm working with a shipper. He's like, man, like you got to meet my buddy. That type of deal. Yeah. He's in Phoenix, calls me, hey, I've been running around doing my thing. Like, let's meet. We have this fabulous 2-hour lunch. You talk about connections and then like we leave that meeting. He's got 5 or 6 notes, shares them with me. He's like, hey, I'll introduce you to all these people. And you're just like, this is like I had no business. Like I literally just got intro to this customer 4 months ago for the first time. I know who they are. I know no one there. Next thing you know, a buddy of a buddy, and I'm sitting in Phoenix having that lunch. And that's why I think you have to be willing, to your point, the rocks, and to keep going. And honestly, in the face of all the adversity that you're going to feel, because there's just going to be ups and downs and like that core thing, but you got to like continue to search for those opportunities, to the unlocks, if you will.
There comes a time when dreams become a reality, when you see your vision materialize into a true work of art. And the only way to get there is to choose a general contractor who shares that same vision and knows how to bring it to life. At Bleu, we aren't so big that we've forgotten where we've come from, and we aren't so small that we can't care for your projects regardless of their size. When your vision deserves safety, perfection, timeliness, and expertise in order to become a reality, trust Bleu to get it done right the first time.
Another piece of advice, and I'm curious how you feel about this. I probably get better network and better referrals and better of the, what am I trying to say? That aura about what you just described with your lunch on the no's than the yeses. So in other words, when I have those meetings like you had yesterday, I might not transact with those people for 2 to 3 years. Mm-hmm. But in other words, there's no imminent deal there, but usually the network alone leads to so many more openings, to whether it's education, capital, this, that, all those other things, all those ancillary things that actually are helping you grow both individually and with your organization. Yeah. To me, I almost find that more rewarding than a yes of a transaction.
Yeah.
Do you see that too?
Absolutely.
Okay.
Absolutely. And it's those, like, I look at my strongest relationships now in the business. It's like people I've been working with for 5 or 6 years.
Right.
And it's that bamboo story, right? It doesn't grow, but when it grows, it's strong.
Right.
But you got to wait for it to grow, because if you think it's just going to sprout right away and you're going to, it doesn't work like that. But hence the rocks and all the planting that you do, like every time you're fostering these relationships and being authentic and putting your heart out there, like people want to see people naturally be successful. Clearly investors want to get returns and financial returns, but like true entrepreneurs and business people, like, yes, they want the return, but they also want to be a part of it. And so if you can frame your business so that folks can see that vision and be a part of that journey, then they're willing to make bets on you. And you get to bigger organizations, like the bets you're asking for are relatively small, but they still want to be a part of it because there's other stuff that they see in their future as you scale out that may be, from an ancillary perspective, really benefit to what they're trying to do. So it's not altruistic, right, by any means, but in a way it kind of is. It's this weird intersection of like doing it because you love it, but then it pays back at some point, and you just don't know when and how. And you got to be okay with that, like, kind of ambiguous nature of it all.
I think you frame that very well. Let's go back into tangible logistic stuff. Mm-hmm. So if we go back to 2020, we all know what happened. Couldn't get anything, blah, blah, blah. And then all of a sudden here we are, 2024, and Phoenix is blowing up. We're this distribution juggernaut of intermodal whatever.
Yeah.
You're a guy in the business. Let's geek out. So what has happened from 2020 till now, and with all the distribution type modeling that's being set up here for tech manufacturing and everything, what does it look like through the eyes of Shannon in the futures? And I'll keep asking you questions, but let's start there.
Yeah, I'd say number one, if you're in Phoenix or you follow the Phoenix market, you've seen all the boxes, right? The buildings going up, and there's more coming, right? I mean, obviously these things take multiple years for planning. We've got massive customers that are, oh, hey, we've got this opening in 25, this opening in 26.
Yeah, it's not 100,000 square feet either. It's millions of square feet.
Massive, especially if you're on the west side, you're off the 303, you see it all happening. I think the why for folks, and this, much like the housing market, right? Hard to do business in California. Hard to hire in California, hard to deal with the California laws, hard to get real estate. Mm-hmm. So if you think about it, it's only, just like for all of us that live here and go the other way for like the summertime when we can, right? The other way, it's only a 6-hour drive. So instead of investing or feeling like they have to overinvest, they're really utilizing the infrastructure that exists in California and saying, hey, but we'll make our kind of hub and spoke or our major distribution centers in a place like Phoenix. You'll also see it in Nevada. You also even hear some conversations about Boise, but then there's weather and mountains and people don't love that as much. So, and you think about from a logistics, from a, California, especially like LA, Long Beach, that's where large majority of the containers in the country come through. It's the largest port still from a volume perspective. So that is the mecca when you're talking about overseas goods, inbound, outbound. So LA really drives, SoCal drives that. But in order for costing, now you're going to see these other areas be so popular, which is why you see the building and the infrastructure that all these massive companies are investing in.
And then from an intermodal standpoint, do you think will the rail to truck pick up or just stay kind of the current ratio?
I think stay the current ratio when you study kind of
because the infrastructure is just too expensive.
The infrastructure is too expensive. There's only, handfuls of, and there's really two main ones that dominate the country. So they have no interest in. So
as long as Warren owns everything.
Those are really good American businesses that are hard to break into. So I think they have a really.
That might be more than a Series A to get that.
Yeah, I think they have a really good grasp on their supply and demand metrics, as well as their profitability. Right, like there's a reason why rail runs at the levels of profit that it does. There's just not a lot of It's completely different than truck, which is the interesting part about logistics. Like truck is all that spread out, hundreds of thousands, anybody can compete. Rail's not built the same.
What about the impact of northern Mexico being, with the onshoring in relation to the new China? How's it going to affect your business?
It's going to affect it huge. I literally have a call tomorrow on a deal.
Hopefully another free lunch.
No, this is just a phone call. But it's blowing up in that corridor.
And do you guys currently do a lot of that?
We don't do a ton there just because we're relatively new. There's some liability and some restrictions.
Well, get past those encumbrances. Come on.
Yeah, but with a couple good strategic partners, we would definitely be more incentivized to do so. So a couple conversations to be had, but that area... and you mentioned the new China. I think that's interesting. Like, it's all going towards, Mexico. You've got Monterrey and these interesting areas that are just incredible growth, unbelievable. But the interesting part about China or the new China is, who's the biggest investor down there? The Chinese, right? They aren't getting cut out. They're just changing their investment scheme. It's much like many. Areas and countries have with tons of money, like they understand that there's a livelihood or a longevity to their investment scheme, and so they have the chips. They're just putting them in new places.
At the end of the day, capitalism and entrepreneurship, money goes where the money can be made. It's pretty simple. That's like we had, Glenn Williamson was on, who a wonderful guy who represents the whole Canadian, how much of the Canadian capital is sitting down here in Arizona, Mexico, and how it's all tethered and tied. It's like, and he just made it very simple to understand. We get a higher return on the dollar or the loonie that we put in here than if it was sitting in some of the resource in an area that has a lesser return. It's just simple economics. That's all it is.
Phoenix ain't bad in the winter either.
No. Shoot, now you get after me. I was going to ask you something else, but I can't remember what it was. Yes. So for the layperson out there, what is speaking of like the logistics, post 2020, when we think about getting stuff to, like, let's use the construction job sites. We had all sorts of supply chain things. What are the biggest struggles that you guys have, or that your shippers and carriers have in going forward with the demand? Is it lack of drivers, lack of trucks? What are the boogeymen that keep you up at night in your industry?
It's the market. So what's interesting from like my financial career to the logistics career is the market swings of transportation. And so you go from a shipper's market, right? A shipper's market would be an abundance of trucking capacity and not as much goods that need to be moved, which would be where we sit today. Right, so that becomes a shipper's market, and then so all of your shippers are really focused on are able to lower that cost because there's so many participants. But naturally, because it's a market, as you lower the cost to a certain point, you start to change the market conditions to where, you think about things like insurance and fuel and labor and all that, like they don't go down in your world, in my world, in the trucker's world, nothing. But as the price starts to drop, you basically erode it to past the point of where it's operational. So while you're in the shipper's market and you've got like maybe, GDP is huge in this because everything that, this is the coolest part about trucking, I think, that you kind of fall in love with, like the grocery store never feels the same. Like the retail out, like you walk into a Fry's or an Albertsons or something like that, and you're like, oh my gosh, like this many products from this many different companies all here, it's kind of a trip, right? And you have all the label, and you don't realize that until you're in trucking. And the other thing, you don't realize all the different trucks that you see on the road until you are in trucking, right? Yeah. So kind of a cool aspect. But to get back, so the market shifts, and so what you're seeing now is a revocation period. So people are losing their businesses. Those small, medium-sized trucking, they're going out. The people that oversupplied since 2020 and the rates were really good, and there was all the disruption, well, that came with a lot of rate. That's been eroded over the last 2 years, and now we've been in this abnormally low cycle where the economics are really challenging to run a business. You have to be incredibly disciplined and or have huge reserves, and that is not happening. And so you're starting to see over the last 8 months, the revocations start to ramp. Even the stats that just came out show like huge trucking failures because companies just can't survive at the bottom on those costs. And then naturally, what goes up in like a 2020 has kind of probably too far down. And so this interesting thing about markets is like trying to figure out who and how you kind of create something more stable state in the middle. But the market is huge. You're talking about every good everywhere. And so it hasn't happened yet. I think it's a wildly interesting thought of like, how do you create more of a stable state agreement? Hey, I always tell like our partners, like, hey, I'm not trying to take you to the penthouse. Don't take me to the outhouse.
Yeah.
But the problem is
Kendall, remember that one.
But the problem is, right, when the winds are blowing, right, like they're inclined because that rate, that COG for them, that cost of goods sold goes against their bottom line. And hey, they have their natural challenges. So they naturally want to have the cheapest, right? And so as everybody's chasing that cheapest, it starts to erode the capacity. Truckers go out of the market, and then it swings. And trucking's been an interesting one when you follow over the last like 15, 20 years in the market cycles, because they used to be, more abbreviated, the ups and the downs. And then lately, they are just getting wild and swing heavier both ways. And so that chaos is kind of fun in a way from a financial perspective, but also concerning when you think about like, how do I chart a path of growth and consistency and value in a market that trades so wildly every couple years in a new cycle?
Next question before we kind of wrap it up, and this could probably be an hour a conversation alone, but just give me the Shannon version of what's going to happen in the near future with the EV implementation in the trucking business.
I mean, you've seen the struggles in the not commercial, just the residential, like the autos, right?
That's why I'm asking.
Yeah. The problem that you're seeing with commercial is that those weights, when you start hauling tens of thousands, right? You start talking about 80,000 pounds, the size of battery and the infrastructure that you need are really challenging. You start talking about going long distances. They're still optimizing, as we see in autos, and you can go 400 miles and 300 miles. That's a small passenger car.
Right.
You add, 45,000 pounds of product onto a semi, onto a trailer, like it just burns at a certain rate.
The economics don't make sense right now.
It don't, and that's why you see a lot of companies on the alternative side, right? Locally, you look at Nikola, and I know they've had their hardships, but like that's wildly interesting because of the tech. Mm-hmm. There's, really interesting tech that does that. Autonomous is something they talk about, but from an EV perspective, I think we're still far off. Like you'll see them in the local instances, you see them out here, and there's some testing that even happens here in the valley, but it's super costly.
Short haul.
Yeah. Short haul, maybe local, but you start talking long lengths of haul, I think they're a long ways off from EV in the commercial space.
Good. Well, not good. I mean, just good and thanks for explaining that. I didn't mean to pick a political side there because I really don't care. I'm more the which is the economic side that makes sense. Shannon, thanks. I mean, I can't believe that already went like an hour, but thanks for coming on.
Yeah.
appreciate you, appreciate what you're doing in the community. I know a lot of people look up to you for your entrepreneurship and what you and your team have done at Freight Vana. And I look forward to continuing our relationship through the foundation. For anyone that's interested, Shannon and his team at Freight Vana, I know they periodically host people coming through to see the cool things that they've done, both from the tech, their entrepreneurship, and their culture. So feel free to reach out to him, he and his team, if anything today inspired you.
Yeah, available on LinkedIn. Check our website out.
They got tons of social out there, so good stuff.
Cool.
Thanks, Shannon.
Thanks, JJ. Appreciate you, man.
You've been listening to the Mac and Blue Show, brought to you by Blue Wave General Contracting. Be sure to subscribe to the Mac and Blue podcast on your favorite podcast platform. Follow JJ Levinsky on LinkedIn and Instagram. Tune in every Monday